Chanting toward annihilation. A Reckoning with Iran's Performative Suicide by Elias Winter. June 16th, 2025.
Opening, a word before the fire. I have written, before now, of two nations and their twin illusions. Iran, the ancient land that wrapped its trauma in theology and mistook its scars for revelation. And Israel, the wounded child turned military priesthood, whose war on memory became a foreign policy. Those essays were not equal, but they were symmetrical. They traced the roots of religious power, each in its own soil. The Twin Reckonings was about the soul of Iran, fractured by Islam, yet never fully submitted to it. The mirror and the fire held up Israel's unhealed past and asked what happens when fear becomes state doctrine. But war does not care for essays, and history is not moved by symmetry alone. When missiles fly and capitals burn and civilians weep beneath the flags of men who love slogans more than lives, the work of the writer is no longer merely to explain. It is to indict. And so, this is not a theological essay. It is not a spiritual genealogy of Persia, nor a comparative exegesis of Shi'a symbolism. That work has been done. This is something else. This is an essay about bad leaders, about men who lead nations not to renewal, but to ruin, about the kind of man who shouts, "Death to America," on a stage while his people starve, about the kind of man who prays at the Wailing Wall with the photographers ready, hoping the West will bring him home to rule again. This is about a nation caught between the Ayatollah's chants and the Crown Prince's grin, between theater and impotence, threat and nostalgia. But it begins long before either of them. It begins with the sound of horses, with flames, with walls made of skulls. It begins, as these stories often do, in Persia. A king once ruled there centuries before the revolution, before the Shah, before America and Israel, and uranium enrichment and slogans. A king who made a choice so foolish, so arrogant, that it summoned an empire from the east and invited the total annihilation of his land. This king believed no one would dare challenge him. He sent back the heads of diplomats. He spat on offers of peace. And in return, he was given what all deluded tyrants are eventually given, a reckoning of fire. Let us begin there.
Chapter 1. The King Who Summoned the Mongols. The messenger arrived dusty, respectful, and precise. He carried with him a parchment of commerce and peace. Genghis Khan, the thunder from the east, had sent this emissary to the Persian king with no threat, only a hand extended. Let us trade. Let us prosper. Let the Silk Road connect empires, not drown them in blood. The Shah, Ala al-Din Muhammad II, ruler of the Khwarezmian Empire, did not respond as a sovereign. He responded as a fool, suspicious, insecure, drenched in the arrogance of a man who has never lost a war, but has also never faced an enemy worthy of one. He accused the Mongol envoy of spying. He killed the merchants. He shaved the heads of the ambassadors. He humiliated the voice of peace. And in so doing, he called for fire. Not metaphorical fire, not rhetorical fire, not the kind shouted from pulpits or printed on placards. Actual fire. The kind that melts cities into sand. The kind that turns libraries into ash and dynasties into whispers. Genghis Khan, when informed of this insult, did not rant. He did not chant death. He simply gathered his armies. In 1219, the Mongols crossed the Syr Darya River. They moved not like soldiers. but like a force of nature, precise, unrelenting, methodical in their cruelty. City after city fell: Bukhara, Samarkand, Nishapur, Merv. Where once there were gardens, there were now pyramids of skulls, tens of thousands executed, women raped, children burned alive inside mosques. The very architecture of Persia began to change, not by redesign, but by erasure. It was not merely conquest, it was obliteration, and it had been invited. The king who ruled over this empire, this once majestic land of poets and astronomers and mystics, did not die in battle. He fled. He hid. He died alone on an island in the Caspian Sea, his legacy written not in stone, but in smoke. This is how Iran was once lost, not to superior force, but to failed leadership, to a man so deluded by his own power that he could not imagine the limits of it, to a ruler who mistook provocation for strength and treated diplomacy as weakness. And the Mongols came, and they did not stop. They did not care that Persia had once been the jewel of civilization. They did not care that the Shah was righteous in his own mind. They responded not to ideals, but to insult. And Persia, the beloved, became a memory written in blood. This is not a story from another world. This is the prologue to our own. When leaders chant death, when they provoke without power, when they mock what they cannot defeat, they do not preserve sovereignty. They invite erasure. The Ayatollah is not Allah al-Din, and Israel is not the Mongol horde. But history does not repeat. It rhymes. And the fire, once summoned, knows not where to stop.
Chapter 2. The Ayatollah of Words. He wears black, like the morning he commands. He speaks with certainty, like a man who mistakes volume for truth. And 5 times a day, on 5 different networks, the slogans flow. Death to Israel. Death to America. Death to arrogance. Death to the great Satan. The Ayatollah is not a general. He is not a philosopher. He is a man of theater, cloaked in the language of eternity, standing atop a stage built from the bones of 1979. He speaks in absolutes because he knows nothing else works. He governs not through governance, but through chant. And for decades he has survived, not by feeding his people, not by healing their wounds, not by offering vision, but by offering them an enemy. America, Israel, the West. It is a tired list, but it remains effective, so long as enough are poor, enough are afraid, enough remember the Shah and not the shadow now cast in his place. But here is the truth. The Ayatollah does not want death. Not really. This is the lie beneath the lie. Shi'ism, at its most political, has always hidden behind the metaphor. The slogan was never literal. They never truly meant to wipe a people off the map. They meant the regime, they said. They meant Zionism, not Jews. They meant imperialism, not Americans. They always meant something else, but the world doesn't parse metaphor when missiles are real. The West does not parse liturgy when uranium is enriched. And Israel never forgets a threat. This is what the Ayatollah never understood. You do not shout death to Israel at a country whose children were burned in ovens. You do not call for extermination, rhetorically or otherwise, against a nation that sees in every chant the echo of 1939. Because even if you do not mean it, they do not care. They will respond. With fear, with fury, with bombs. And the Ayatollah, who has built his rule upon performance, is shocked to discover that fire takes theater at its word. There is a cruelty in his chants, yes, but there is also a cowardice. He chants because he cannot build. He chants because he cannot win. He chants because he is weak and needs his people to feel strong. But this is not strength. This is suicide by slogan. And it does not end in the triumph of the oppressed. It ends with hospitals in Tehran turned to rubble and young men digging through the remains of their own capital. He does not mean it. But fire does not ask for meaning.
Chapter 3. Death 2. The history of a slogan. It began, as these things often do, in the throes of revolution. Tehran, 1979. The Shah was gone. The streets were electric with possibility and revenge. And into the vacuum stepped the clerics, poets of punishment, mystics of martyrdom, engineers of the void. Marg, Bar, Amrika. Death to America. It was chanted first by students, then by soldiers, then by state television. It became not a policy, but a pulse. Not a declaration of war, but a sacrament. The chant was contagious. Soon came Marg Bar Israel. Then death to the Soviet Union. Then death to arrogance, death to infidels, death to enemies of the Imam. They chanted death like Westerners chant freedom, without irony, without end, and without the slightest intention of honoring it. The slogans served many masters. They soothed the crowd. They justified the arrests. They filled the silence of a regime that had no economic plan, no foreign strategy, no real understanding of the world beyond its borders. But this is the genius and the curse of Shi'a political culture. It builds power out of symbol. In Shi'ism, suffering is sacred, martyrdom is theatre. Speech is never just speech. Every chant, every poster, every blood-red banner is a reenactment of Karbala. You are not just protesting, you are joining Imam Hussein in his final noble stand. And so, death to America was never just diplomatic bluster. It was liturgy, a call and response for a nation at war with modernity, led by men who wore black robes, not as clothing, but as costume. But liturgy can ossify. The chant outlived the revolution. It echoed through the Iran-Iraq war, through sanctions, through Rafsanjani and Khatami and Ahmadinejad, and now Khamenei. It became background noise, emptied of intent, but still filled with danger. Because even a hollow threat, repeated long enough, begins to sound like a vow. And the world, particularly Israel, does not hear it as metaphor. How could they? Death to Israel is not heard as a critique of apartheid, or a yearning for justice, or a call for a binational state. It is heard as a promise of annihilation. And in a traumatized state built from ashes, where every citizen is trained from birth to remember 6 million silences, a promise of death is not ignored. It is preempted. That is how slogans kill. Not by turning words into weapons, but by turning fear into policy. And the Ayatollah, who never meant what he said, now lives in the ruins of what he never meant. The chant was supposed to be ritual. It became a curse. And the fire, once again, came in answer.
Chapter 4. Blackmail by Bomb, Iran's Nuclear Path. The atom came to Iran not with the mullahs, but with the monarch. It was the Shah, America's man in Tehran, who first courted the dream of nuclear power. The 1970s were golden years for empire-drenched modernity. Iran had oil, The West had appetite, and the United States had a plan. Give the Shah everything. Let him be our lighthouse in the Gulf. And so, reactors were ordered. Contracts were signed. Bushehr was born. The Tehran Nuclear Research Center was launched with American help. By 1974, the Shah was already predicting 23 nuclear plants by the year 2000. But power breeds paranoia. The monarchy collapsed before the atom could mature. The Islamic Republic, rising from the ashes of secular modernism, saw in the bomb not salvation, but blasphemy. Ayatollah Khomeini, in the early years, rejected the program entirely. Weapons of mass destruction were un-Islamic, he said. God did not need uranium to defend his people. And for a moment, the story could have ended there. But revolutions age. The slogans get tired. The oil price dips. The West imposes sanctions. Iraq invades. And slowly, the idea returns, quietly, cautiously. Not as an act of war, but as an act of leverage. Because if the Islamic Republic could not win through wealth and could not charm through diplomacy, it could frighten. If it could not be admired, it could at least be feared. The nuclear program became a kind of performance, not quite a weapon, not quite a project, a theater of enrichment designed to extract concessions from the West while stirring nationalist pride at home. Each round of centrifuges was matched by a round of negotiations. Each breakthrough was followed by a press release, a back channel, a plea. Sanctions relief for delay. Oil revenue for cooperation. Threat for trust. It was never about the bomb. The Islamic Republic did not want Hiroshima. It wanted insurance, a shield, a bargaining chip, a whisper to the world. We may not have one yet, but we could. And isn't that reason enough to keep us at the table? Meanwhile, Israel listened, and Israel prepared. Because for Israel, a nuclear Iran was not politics. It was existential. And existential threats are not managed. They are erased. But the Ayatollah and his circle misunderstood the soul of their enemy. They thought Tel Aviv would act like Brussels. They thought deterrence would work on a state born from genocide. They forgot that paranoia is policy in Jerusalem. And while Dubai built towers and Riyadh forged deals, Iran became the specter of the Middle East. Always threatening, never trusted, forever punished. And the truth, the tragic truth, is this. Iran never got the bomb. They never even came close. The world burned them for what they might do, while their people suffered for what they never had. This is the cruelty of performance. You chant death, and no one believes you. You build reactors, and everyone does. And in the end, you are left with no bomb, no trust, no allies, no future. Only fire. Fire from the sky. Fire on the ground. Fire that answers a threat you never meant to keep.
Chapter 5. The Prince and the Impotence of Return. He appears on screens, well lit and well fed, like an afterthought of empire. His jaw is square, his tone is soft, his hands too clean. He wears the look of exile like a tailored suit, measured, polished, worn too long. This is Reza Pahlavi, the Crown Prince, the son of the last Shah, and the latest man to imagine that a nation which has bled for 40 years might welcome back the hand that signed the wound. He stands with the West now. Of course he does. He poses with congressmen. He flirts with think tanks. He rubs shoulders with the Israeli right. He calls for democracy with the accent of Georgetown while dreaming of coronation in the language of Versailles. He is not evil. He is simply deluded, because the country he left is not the country he hopes to rule. Iran is not a stage for royal restoration. It is a wounded civilization, allergic to imposition, traumatized by both turban and crown. And worst of all, it remembers. It remembers that his father rose to power not by popular will, but by CIA orchestration. It remembers that Mossadegh, the democratically elected prime minister, was toppled in 1953 by American and British hands, and that the Shah, Reza's father, was their reward. That memory did not die in the revolution. It became the revolution. It is the founding trauma of modern Iran, that the West chooses rulers not by consent, but by convenience. That democracy is denied to Persians not because they don't want it, but because their democracy once nationalized oil. And so when the crown prince wraps himself in the Israeli flag, when he praises the bombing of his own homeland, when he speaks of liberation from afar, he is not seen as a patriot. He is seen as a puppet, not because he is Israeli, not because he is royal, but because he returns with foreign hands at his back. Iran knows this pattern. It has danced it before. And this is why his face, even as it smiles, radiates impotence. Because he is not returning with an army. He is not returning with fire. He is returning with handshakes, with press releases, with the naive hope that history has forgotten what it never forgave. But history in Iran does not fade. It sings, it mourns, it buries kings. And no matter how many photos he takes with Israeli ministers, no matter how many interviews he gives in perfect English, the Persian street sees only one thing: a prince raised in exile, hoping to rule from it. And that, in the end, is not leadership. That is theatre. And this empire has already had enough of that.
Chapter 6. The Burned City. History does not repeat. It rhymes, they say. But in Tehran, it does more than rhyme. It returns, cloaked in smoke, sirens, and ash. Once, the Mongols came. They built pyramids of skulls outside every Persian gate. They turned cities into shadows, libraries into soot, men into memories. And yet, for all their savagery, they were invited. It was not their greed that breached the empire. It was the arrogance of its leaders. It was a Shah, arrogant, foolish, vain, who slit Persia's own throat by spitting on diplomacy, killing Mongol envoys, and assuming that geography would protect him. It did not, and now again the fire returns. But this time, it is not Mongols riding in from the east. It is drones. It is bombs. It is surgical strikes and satellite-guided revenge, launched by a nation who saw death to Israel not as metaphor, but as mission. Tehran burns. Not entirely, not yet. But the sky has opened. The sirens have howled. And the images, real or imagined, flicker across the world. A neighborhood shattered, a building collapsed, an old woman screaming for breath through the smoke. This is the price of theater. Because when you chant death and build no bomb, when you speak in prophecy and govern with impotence, when you threaten annihilation and offer only gestures, eventually, someone calls your bluff, and fire answers. The Ayatollah in his chambers cannot stop it. The prince, in his exile, cannot redeem it. And the people, in their millions, stand once more between empire and ruin, ruled by actors, punished by history, forgotten by both. And still they chant. Some out of fear, some out of habit, some because the slogans are the only thing left that feels like control. But the chant no longer protects them. It no longer frightens the enemy. It only invites the flame. And the city, ancient, wounded, gasping, burns.
Chapter 7. The Performance and the Grave. Great nations do not die of weakness. They die of illusion, of stories repeated long after belief has vanished, of leaders who mistake applause for authority, slogans for power, posture for defense. Iran is not weak. It is ancient. It has outlived emperors, prophets, crusaders, and capitalists. But age is not immunity. And memory, if misused, can become a tomb. The Ayatollah chants, but does not govern. He invokes Hussein, but offers no justice. He rules not by wisdom, but by fear. And fear, unlike faith, is a currency that collapses. The crown prince waits, but does not lead. He smiles for cameras and speaks of freedom, but he is carried not by the people, only by foreign hands. He dreams of a return, but the country he dreams of does not dream of him. And the people, those who still love the land, who still plant the seeds, who still walk beneath the burned sky with heads held high, they carry the cost. They are the ones who will bury the charred remains. They are the ones who will remember not the fire, but the farce that invited it. And if there is hope, and there is always hope, it lies not in the cleric or the crown, but in the quiet refusal of ordinary people to chant what they no longer believe. Iran must end the performance. It must leave behind the death songs, the empty thrones, the suicidal slogans. It must remember what it once was, not to relive it, but to transcend it. The grave is full of kings, the stage is full of ghosts, but the nation, if it chooses truth over theatre, memory over myth, silence over spectacle, may yet survive them both.
Epilogue: A nation not yet written. There is another Iran, not the one of turbans and chants, not the one of exiles and embassies, not the burned city or the blackened sky, but an Iran beneath it all, quiet, breathing, unfinished. It does not speak in slogans, it whispers in gardens, in books passed hand to hand, in songs sung softly where the regime cannot hear, in the courage of women who walk unveiled not in defiance, but in dignity. This Iran does not chant death. It dreams of something more dangerous, life without fear. It dreams not of empires reborn, but of neighbors reconciled, of a Middle East that does not build its future on revenge. It knows that greatness is not returned by uranium or restored by royal blood. Greatness is not a weapon. It is a wound healed. The future of Iran does not belong to the Ayatollah, nor to the Crown Prince, nor to the West. It belongs to the child who learns Persian poetry before propaganda, to the woman who teaches her daughter that martyrdom is not a destiny, to the men who refuse to kill or chant and simply plant. If there is hope, it is here, in the ordinary, in the people too tired to perform, too wise to return, too human to burn. Let others build their politics on graves. Let Iran build on memory, yes, but memory transformed. Not the memory of slogans, the memory of Hafez and Khayyam, of Rumi, not revenge, a memory that reaches forward, not back. The fire may still come, it may already be here, but fire does not write the last word. People do. And Iran, if it dares to be a nation, not a symbol, may yet choose to write itself again, not in ash, but in ink, not as a chant, but as a voice. Elias Winter, author of Language Matters, a space for reflection on language, power, and decline.